Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see everyone here for poetry. I'm Lucy Handley of the Ridgefield Library. I coordinate the adult programs, and I'm here tonight with Barb Jennis, who originated this wonderful series, Poems from Connecticut's Four Corners. Barb was our poet laureate. Well, now she's the Emerita, but she's done so much for the town and the library and for poetry in general. Welcome, Barb.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you, Ridgefield Library, for being such a wonderful host for all these poetry programs that we are able to facilitate here in town. So, and welcome, a nice large audience. We appreciate you all coming. This is a great turnout. Poems from Connecticut's Four Corners is basically a sampler of 5 poets each month, one from each of the 4 corners and one from the central Hartford region. Each poet will only read for about 12 minutes, which is really a short amount of time, both as a listener and as a poet. But as I said, it's sort of to give you a small taste of all the amazing poetry that's happening all over the state of Connecticut. So we're glad you're here. Also, if any of you are poets and would like to participate in a future program, we are starting to put together scheduling for 2024. All you have to do is email me, barbchenis@gmail.com, and give me your town of residence. We need to, assign you to the right quadrant, and a short bio would be a great place to start. And we look forward to hearing from you. So, and also please tell friends too who might be interested in the program. We have a great program lined up for you this evening. I want to get started without further ado. What I'm going to do is read a very condensed biography for each of our poets, but I will at the same time put a longer, more thorough bio in the chat. So I invite you to look there for the names of their publications and things like that. So first, happy November, everybody. I hope you all said, what is it, rabbit, rabbit, rabbit when you woke up. That's supposed to be the good luck thing to do every month the first day. Okay, so first up, we have Joan Kantor. Joan Kantor's poems appear in several poetry collections and in numerous journals. She won the 2013 Hackney Literary Award for poetry, and her collection, Fading into Focus, took first place for poetry in the 2015 Writer's Digest Self-Published Book Contest. Joan has mentored young poets at the Sunken Garden Poetry Festival. She also performs in Stringing Words, an interactive performance of poetry and violin music. So please welcome Joan Kantor.
Welcome, everyone. And I want to thank you, Barb, and also the Ridgefield Public Library for inviting me to be a part of this. And I'm going to start my reading with poems from Florida, which is where I'm about to head shortly, and just a couple of poems. And I'm going to start with a nature poem, and I'm going to end with a nature poem. The first one is punctuated. Mornings elude me. I don't come alive till noon. But today, rising at 6 a.m., I headed to the marsh for a glimpse of dawn's most colorful creatures feeding against a background of burgeoning light. In the pink-tinged mist, birds had gathered by the hundreds. A white pelican separated from its flock, pairs of cackling sandhill cranes, ibis, egrets, herons, black-necked stilts robotically walking, then gracefully taking flight, skimmers swooping down to swiftly glide above the surface, their open beaks scooping water, leaving liquid trails behind. The view was a visual hum, a statement of beauty and peaceful coexistence, so close to home. And the coral-winged roseate spoonbills I'd come to see turned out to be the exclamation points. Thanks. I'm going to read some timely poems, and I mean that in a sad sense. The next poem I'm going to read is based on an NPR report from way back when about the missing in Iraq. In limbo, in a country where hundreds of thousands are missing, desperate, families are searching, and as months roll into years, what they fear becomes almost real. But questions still remain, open wounds that time cannot heal. One woman, trying to hold on to hope, presses her face deep into a piece of well-worn fabric to inhale the slightest hint of a lingering scent before beginning the endless ritual of folding and unfolding her son's clothing. The subject of this poem is in Afghanistan. Two faces. In the market, I see her eyes staring out flat and wonder what expression hides beneath her burqa. I suspect the corners of her mouth are weighted down as she holds her girl child, whose empty eyes are already practicing how to survive. The next two poems are what I call family poems, and they're about my mother. The first one is about my mother, and the second one is about my mother-in-law, two very dear people to me. And I wrote these both shortly after they passed away. And, excuse me, Kitchen Companions, for my mother, Miriam Gantz, who so joyfully shared her kitchen with me. My mother's been waiting for me to open the narrow drawer beside the stove, where, smiling with anticipation, I reach for the dingy pink aluminum measuring spoons that once were hers. They clatter and clink till firmly cradled in my hands, they radiate a warmth that rushes through me. As the passage of time disappears, she and I silently begin to converse and proceed with preparations for a meal she will never share. She'd like me to use her crusty black cast iron pan, but I'm saving its heft for the day those tiny spoons will no longer be enough to stir her up. And my mother actually visits me periodically. I know that sounds strange, but that was one of the visitations. This next poem is about my mother-in-law, who was quite the eccentric, amazing person. And I wrote this after she passed, when I was really grieving very deeply for her. I was missing her so much, and I just couldn't let go. It's called Bookmark, and it's dedicated to the memory of Dorothy Kantor, a most amazing woman. It's time to empty and sell her apartment, to dismantle what's left of her life, to toss or donate household items and clothing that nobody wants, distribute her jewelry, crystal, silver, all while holding tightly onto memories they elicit. Her photos are the hardest to discard, especially the crumpled sepia ones of people who came alive for her alone and now anonymously are destined to follow her in death. While looking at teenage pictures of her laughing with friends, I wonder which one's the gentleman from her high school days who contacted us when she hadn't returned his calls, who, shocked and deeply saddened at her passing, told us that he'd pined for her well into his 90s. Had she even been aware of his feelings? We were so close. I think I would have known, but now I'll never be sure if she left this world with business left undone. Tall, beautiful, outspoken, loyal, loving, larger than life. She's uncharacteristically beginning to fade to a whisper. I try to turn the volume up. By listening to voicemails I can't bring myself to erase. Weeks ago, I took a book from her nightstand, brought it home and placed it on mine, then couldn't pick it up. It was the last one that she'd been reading and had planned to pass on to me. So I'm finally trying to read it, and she's with me all the way. I'm just a few chapters in, but know that when I finally reach the bookmark looming in the middle, she'll be telling me it's time to turn the page. Thank you. The next several poems are from my newest collection, Filling in the Black, One Woman's Journey of Re-Education. And before I say anything more, I want to explain that I in no way am usurping or attempting to usurp the Black experience in America. When I when the George Floyd trial ended and I started to read a little bit more about Tulsa's massacre, my husband and I had an RV we had just bought, and we decided to take a mission trip. And the mission was to educate ourselves about African American history. And we traveled all over the South and the Midwest to do so. And these are a few poems from there. This first one is A Crumbling Facade, and it's dedicated to the memory of George Floyd and to a better future of inclusion and true equality. A Crumbling Facade. I'm crying white tears for a Black man and those unjustly killed before him, for those whose killers hid beneath hoods or behind blue walls, for those who died dangling from trees or crushed beneath knees. These tears of hope are falling into a pool where Black, white, and brown are beginning to swirl side by side beneath a cracked and crumbling facade, where brave young girls hold their cell phones high for the world to finally see what's always been true. I tend to be the hopeful type. This next one is dedicated to the memory of John Lewis, and it is about the march from Selma to Montgomery. And the title of the poem is The March for Love. If they'd only had the courage to look with open minds into the hopeful eyes of this earnest young man, silently asking why, his Black face resplendent with dignity and the possibility of offering forgiveness, his head held high above a sea of peaceful protest. Before he was beaten, before he chose to get into good trouble, they might have found themselves tossing their billy clubs aside and reaching instead for the wide open hands of the future. I worked at Manchester Community College for many years, and it's where I actually began to get my new education of what African American society, life, history was all about. This poem is, I saw this happen way too often. Different diplomas. He walks across the stage, reaches for his diploma as his parents wildly cheer. The first in his family to graduate, he's done so with a bare bones urban education and a set of 8th grade skills. Bright, full of hope, he's off to community college, where he'll hit the wall like so many before him. Today, standing tall in a bright red cap and gown, he's pumping a fist as he carefully grips that flimsy piece of ribbon-tied paper. Tomorrow, he'll discover that others were pumping fists full of gold. This is the last poem, I believe, about that. And then I'm just going to read the nature poem and I'll be all done. Let There Be Light, a hopeful poem. This is the experience we had in a North Carolina grocery store. Let there be light. The Black cashier, her head an orange blur of little twisted puffs, is bombarded by a willowy teen with silky blonde hair, who's running towards her register while rambling on about a corsage and what she's wearing to prom. She holds her phone close enough for the woman to see the image of a gown, and it's clear that there's an ease between them. They share something very special. And the woman's approval matters to the girl, who scampers away as, turning to us, the woman proudly says, "That's my girl." This interaction both touches and disturbs me deeply. It's one that should not stand out, but instead be one of many I've been part of or witnessed before. Yet it isn't, though I come from the North. Here in the South, I just witnessed an unself-conscious intimacy between the races. But was it flowing from generations of mammies and their charges? I'm not sure that even matters. The equation is changing. And what I just saw was mutual love and respect, with no resemblance to a derivative inequality. If these two ordinary Southerners were able to see the light, then it must be shining in us. And I'm gonna ease out with a nature poem. I'm gonna take you on a trail ride with me in Litchfield, Connecticut, because there's nothing like an autumn trail ride. On the cusp, high in the saddle, gently jolted back and forth, my legs pressed against the warmth, solid curve of flexing muscled haunches, one hand wrapped in the soft loop of well-fingered reins, the other holding a leather smooth horn. Up and down, forward I ride, to the clop clatter and heavy thud of hooves, on pine needle padding and coarsely crushed rock, past ghostly patches of faded ferns, their crisp brown edges curled, past fields with crisp beige stalks of leftover corn, and through autumnal tunnels of plants and trees, burnt orange, evergreen, crimson, gold, peach. And as I breathe in the smoky, sap-scented air, leaves unhinge, then spin, while drifting towards earth in the prescience of a rustling, cool breeze. Thank you.
Wonderful, Joan. Wonderful. What a diversity. That was wonderful. I was very touched by the poems from Iraq and Afghanistan. The image of the mother folding and refolding her son's clothing was just heart-wrenching. So
It was true. It was true, sadly.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, our pleasure. Okay, so next up, we have Sharon Smith. Sharon is retired from a corporate career in 2005 and began teaching yoga. She notes that, quote, poetry and yoga both enhance the pleasure of being alive on this planet. Sharon is a member of several poetry groups, and she published her first book of poetry, Reflection, just last year. So please welcome Sharon Smith.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you all for coming. It's really cool to have this many people here today to listen to poetry. The first poem I'm reading is called What Comes Next. I will die in September on a clear day. It won't be cold. I'll be at the very end of Cape Cod with soft dunes, high tides, orange evening skies. I'll look across the horizon, see water-touched sky, and just a hint of Earth's curve. Smell those salt smells you get where oceans lap up against the edges of continents. I'll have clam chowder for dinner. No, wait, I'll have a lobster roll. Yes, a lobster roll. Drawn butter on the side, maybe a slice of key lime pie. After dinner, I'll put on a warm hoodie and walk in the sand. Death will take me there on that beach. 1 minute I'm there, then I'm not. We'll see what comes next. My next poem is called Their Best Mistake, for my parents, Luella and Eleanor. My birth was no accident. That required great gusts of grunting as my small, strong, steel-willed mother pushed me out to safety, accessing 10,000 years practice passed down in the marrow of her bones. But the initial news of me was met with chagrin and gnashing of teeth. Happy with their family's size, sons evenly spaced, 7, 9, 11, they thought their diaper days were done. Now they both had rhythm. Dad played the spoons to the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night. Mom hummed hymns as she dusted. But rhythm had failed them this time, and I was on my way. A small house on Osage Street with 5 tiny rooms, an outhouse, and a lovely, spacious yard. Their boys were loud and quick, much running, jumping, laughing, muddy shoes and wet mittens. Little money, but plenty of food. Each parent brought their talents. My father, a good mechanic and a hard drinker. My mother, an expert canner and an ardent prayer. They kept a large, well-tended garden, had generous trees that provided shade and cherries and apples and plums. When they first got the news of me, they were discouraged. But when I started to swell my mother's belly, they warmed to the idea of me. When I finally arrived, they welcomed me to their table. Mom said of all the things they got wrong in their many years together, I was their best mistake. Thank you. The next two poems I'm going to read came out of reading about the mystic religions for a world religion course I was taking. So these were really the first poems I wrote. First one is called Hobos, Mystics, and Poets. How did those old dead guys, Rumi and Hafiz, manage to move my 21st century heart? Make me think, hey, I know that. I feel that. I understand that. Would have thought words that old would be stale or at least have that musty smell of books too long in a basement. And it's not just those old Sufis who startle me with their perceptions, delight me with their rhythms, soothe me with their rhymes. Mary Oliver, Bob Dylan, Dana Falls, even my Uncle Cleese wrote words that landed like little sparks of fire on my skin. And some of those words traveled so deep inside me, they touched a spot so in need of touch that it ached with delight. And I thought, this is important. This is some ancient and universal thing. Why isn't everyone laughing or crying? And thank you. And this one is called Tikkun Olam, and it was inspired by the creation myth in the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish book of mysticism. Tikkun Olam, to repair the broken world. Do scattered shards of light lift from mother's prayers? Shoot from Rumi's dancers? Pulse upward when Teresa fed the poor? A million kindnesses every day. Exactly what type of wrench will it take to loosen the tight bolts of hate? When the clay pot shattered, was that when fear was born? Do the scriptures say how much love it'll take to unbreak that divine catastrophe? That was Tikkun Olam. Thank you. This next one is called My Ghosts. My ghosts seem to be a good-natured bunch. They don't try to frighten or bicker or punch. They're subtle and quiet and liquid as air. It takes being silent to notice they're there. They send obscure messages, numbers and such. I work to decode them. It takes a soft touch. I think of them playful and often sincere. They don't ever hurt me or cause me much fear. Their general cheerfulness seems like a sign that on their side of the curtain, everything's fine. I take this to mean death isn't so bad. Instead of an end, it's some kind of launch pad. Launch into what I really don't know. I think it's without the flesh and bones, though. The floating and weightlessness sound kind of nice. No Haagen-Dazs chocolate, I bet, is one price. I'm interested, curious, flat out intrigued why they never seem tired or slightly fatigued. My ghost's basic friendliness does make me feel that being a ghost is a pretty good deal. At Halloween time, though, I am in a quandary. Not sure what to wear, what to take from the laundry. I'm perplexed when the search for a costume begins. My ghosts have no bellies, no cheeks, and no chins. They float around soft and all liquid as air, so I can't seem to pick the right garment to wear. They don't have a sheet, any fabric at all, and it's cold to go naked outside in the fall. Thank you. This next one is called Samapati. Simapati. Words are limiting, but they are what we have to explain moments of communion with something bigger, something sweet and all-encompassing, something that feels personal and universal at exactly the same time. Moments that make me glad to be alive on this planet. Stunning moments, struck quiet by beauty, cracked open by music or a sunset or an act of kindness. Moments of awareness that make my heart quiver. Is this God? I know it has something to do with love. And this next one is called Elmer. Next life. If I get to choose between turtle or rabbit, I will choose turtle. I love turtles. I love their serious demeanor. I love how they take their time getting from place to place. I want to move with that deliberate steadiness, that unhurried gait. I've always loved turtles. When I was 5 or maybe 6, I caught one at the creek, kept him for months, fed him flies. He was the size of a soup spoon's bowl, lovely orange streaks on his throat. I named him Elmer, after my uncle Elmer, Dad's twin. I would take him out of his tank for walks on the floor, on my bed, outside on the driveway. In my parents' room, we had an old piano, secondhand, upright Gulbranson, missing 2 black keys. One day I took Elmer out to walk the keyboard, and he fell into the abyss where F sharp was supposed to be. One minute he was there, the next he wasn't. My mother, father, and I searched. We opened the upper panel, the lid, checked behind the strings, the muffler felt, the hammer rail. Couldn't find him. 2 weeks later, I heard a soft rattling sound and saw Elmer's head sticking out of that F sharp gap. I pulled him out. He was alive. But never again that same carefree guy he had been before his lost days. Thank you. Thank you. This is my last poem. It's called If. If you haven't gazed at the sky today, not a passing glance, but a deep, drink-in, gulping gaze, go outside. Do it now. We'll wait. If when you close your eyes, you can't feel the touch of air on skin, soften your edges, become porous, take up space. If you've forgotten how to dance without regard, stand right up, shake and stomp, slide and sway like a 2-year-old, simply delighted by her music. If you haven't laughed once today, or even if you have, put a hand on your belly and force a big guffaw. Feel sweetness fill your veins. If you find yourself acting more often out of obligation than desire, burn down your house and run as fast as you can toward what gives you joy. Thank you. Thanks, Barb.
Oh, really wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. Again, a great diversity. Everything from the joy of a lobster roll to death as a launch pad. I love that. That was wonderful. And everything in between.
Thank you.
Glad Elmer came back. That sharp abyss is really one you got to watch out for. So thank you again. Very, very joyful poems.
My pleasure.
Gosh. Okay, so next up, let me just get the biography up here. Tony Fusco is the Poet Laureate of the City of West Haven and past president of the Connecticut Poetry Society. He served as editor for Caduceus, the anthology of the Yale Medical Group Art Place, of the Connecticut River Review, and of Long River Run. With 6 books of poetry and 3 chapbooks to his credit, Tony's poetry has won many accolades, including the Sunken Garden Poetry Prize. So please welcome Tony Fusco. Hey, Tony.
Thank you, Barb, and thank you to the Ridgefield Library for having us and this, and especially to friends I see out there that are listening, Vivian Shipley in particular, and Pat Matola, president of the Connecticut Poetry Society, and so many others. So I'd like to read. My first poem is Java Scripture, which is a play on words. JavaScript is a computer language, and Java Scripture is from the Bible. Before I retired, I didn't realize, but I was drinking 3 cups of coffee in the morning before the morning was over, and maybe 2 cups in the afternoon, and it was really a shock when I did. And we were talking to the fellow employees about how important coffee was in our lives. In fact, there was a bit of divinity in coffee. So that sparked this poem called Java Scripture. In the beginning, God created coffee and earth. He divided the caffeine from the decaf and filled the basins called cups. On the second day, he said, "Let there be milk and non-dairy creamer and sugar," and there was lightness and sweetness on the third day. On the fourth day, he called forth cookies and all manner of dunking food, and the Lord saw that breakfast was good, but not fast enough. So on the fifth day, he invented the drive-through. Then spilling coffee upon the earth, the Lord shaped the mud and breathed across it. And there were consumers at the beginning and the end of the 6th day. And on the 7th day, the Lord rested, but could not sleep. So this is a little more serious. It's a bit dated. It's a couple years ago, but during COVID, we had a lot of time to think about things. This is the twilight of America. In the twilight of America, when all the lights went out, there was no rapture, but there were bodies in the sky. When prophets shed their sackcloth for designered suits and makeup, when the cities drowned, the wheat fields shriveled, the orchards dried up, where books were barred, books were burned, books were left unread, where no news was true news, when the eyes of people glazed over, the ears waxed full, where the dead diseases returned from the grave, when the churches were closed, the pews already empty, where armies killed enemies a world away without facing one another. The earth shook, the mud slid, lightning filled the skies like skeleton hands, when the wind twisted its whirlwind, breaking great buildings, when the towers fell, when the wildfires ate the landscape. In the twilight of America, crowds fought in the parks with clubs and rocks and torches. In the twilight of America, when everyone carried a rifle on a sling, a handgun in their handbag, when children hid under desks in lockdown and runners blew to bits in the street. In the twilight of America, the flag, already half-mast, lowered itself the rest of the way down. Okay, this is my doctor calls them vegetables. It's not like I dislike vegetables, I hate them. It's a kind of like people as individuals. Some of them aren't so bad, but as a group, they can be horrible. The worst, of course, are green. Not that I would discriminate by color, it's just a thing of mine. The darker the viridian, the more the distaste. Cooked, they will wilt and lay on the plate like a clump, bitter at being sliced from the ground, wilted soft into a squishy, strung entanglement. Dandelion weeds cut from the cow pasture with a kitchen knife gather into brown paper bags and dirt and all. Worcestershire all, the spinach, the kale, collard greens, grasshoppers and worms are along for the ride. Scrub them all, it doesn't matter. Squash is mushy, broccoli raw slimy, celery catches in your teeth. Onions can make you cry, garlic makes you reek. Asparagus makes your pee smell funny. No one deserves a leak. Vegetables are sneaky. They disguise themselves as fruits and flowers, eggplant, cucumbers, tomato, broccoli, cauliflower, artichokes. Artichoke actually has the word choke in it. And beans? Beans are a whole other group unto themselves. Conspirators. We all know what they're up to. Some peas will give you a black eye. Peanuts send you to the emergency room. Runner beans, soybeans, and garbanzo beans will eventually get you in the end. I've said my say and admit that they're not all bad. Cucumbers are decent if uncomfortable in their skins. They sound like cute. And peppers, well, they're full of pep. And if you keep a secret between you and me, I kind of like Brussels sprouts. I really do. Time-wise here. Yes. All right. This is hypothesis, some ifs. I know you did ifs, Sharon, but these are what ifs. What if the moonlight was a fine wine anyone could afford? What if the smell of fertilizer changed it to the scent of roses, spearmint, and lavender? What if the wail of the ambulance meant a new life was on the way? What if giraffes and rhinos were numerous and the weekend trophy hunters on the near extinction list? What if all the leaked emails leaked down the sewer grates? What if the devil was real, but just misunderstood? What if he were on parole and signed himself into rehab? What if braces and tooth polish could spread into smiles? What if the end of the world happened every day somewhere? What if the last chapter of a book was the beginning, another better one? One, if you raised your hands over your head, everyone would lay down their guns. Imagine the 4th of July fell on Halloween, and we could all masquerade as patriots. Imagine Thanksgiving and Valentine's Day happening together, and everyone could be grateful they had someone to love. Imagine if those greeting kisses on cheeks were real signs of affection. What if the science teacher was right all along? What if monkeys refused to believe we were descended from them? What if insects owned the world and people were just an annoyance? What if words were magic and poetry wrote itself? I think there's room for one more. I was going to do a serious one at the end, but I know people laugh, so I'll read it. This is Snakes and the Rumors of Snakes. There's a 20-foot queen snake in the lot next door. Don't go in there. There are boards with rusty nails you might step on in the tall grass just over the fence. Forget that your cousin has thrown so many of your toys there. Watch out for the old well somewhere thereabouts. Only a thin sheet of plywood was put on top of it, and that was a long time ago. Even a thin little boy like yourself would fall right through, and no one could hear you call for help. Don't squeeze the trumpet-shaped flowers. There may be a beet inside. Stay away from the junk pile behind the new houses. In between the sheetrock, yellow jackets build their nests. Don't jump up and down on your mattress. You can hit your head on the ceiling, or worse, bounce out the window, cutting major arteries. Wait at least 30 minutes after eating before you go in the water. Keep out of old lady Abernathy's yard and her pear trees. She has children tied in her basement and a house full of canning jars. Don't walk across the grave. You'll cause someone in your family to die within a year. Play with a cane and you'll break a leg. Sit in a wheelchair, you'll get polio. Don't swim in the lagoon, no matter how hot a day. Weeds wrap around your ankles, pull you under. It's only for your own good to stay away. Your well-being is truly our only concern. Relax. Now that we have told you these things, there is no reason to worry. Thank you.
Wonderful, Tony. You always make me laugh. The Lord rested but could not sleep. I'm surprised I didn't break the mute button because I was howling. Wonderful, wonderful poems. And conversely, you also had like Moonlight. What if Moonlight were a fine wine anyone could afford? So full spectrum, from humorous to poignant. Thank you so much. Okay, so next up we have, hold on here a second. Well, I guess I have to read it off the hard copy. Okay, Carol Chaput won the 2020 Nutmeg Poetry Award from the Connecticut Poetry Society. Her poems are included in Waking Up to the Earth, Connecticut Poets in a Time of Global Crisis, Global Climate Crisis, and the 2023 Connecticut Literary Anthology. A collection of her poems, Field Notes, was published by Dogwood Press. Carol is an artist and a longtime environmentalist and peace activist. So please welcome Carol. Hi, Carol.
Thank you, Barb. And so nice to see everybody here. The first thing I'm going to read is a sonnet series. There's 3 sonnets in the series, and the title is The Dogs of Chernobyl. Good dog. I taught him to sit, halt, roll over, give paw, and so many other things. I've forgotten them. When orders came to evacuate, I packed 2 bags, one for me and one for him. His toys, a sweater he wouldn't wear but liked to sleep on, his well-loved purple hippo that bleated until he chomped the plastic squeaker thing. No one thought they'd say no pets. It's family when we loved them like that. I couldn't listen to the rumors of soldiers shooting them, the stories of dogs running for miles after the buses when they left for the last time. How they'd starve, succumb to wolf attacks from packs that lived in the forest, radiation refugees. Semi-feral by now, I'd say. He was a good boy. I taught him, stay. Fetch. She stayed hidden, watching me, until the day she finally crept closer, taking bits of food from my hand. She was ordinary, I guess you'd say. Average, brown as toast, but her amber eyes were anything but ordinary. Can you imagine my surprise when she dropped a stick at my feet, as if to say, let's play fetch? I knew she was a survivor, to have eluded the guards who shot dogs on sight. After the meltdown, evacuation, then the no pets policy, only the wary, the lucky or resourceful remained. And this one, apparently, who had a need to fetch. She was seized with a wild joy when she streaked across the fields that summer. Did she love bringing something back that had been thrown away? I dreamed about what I might name her. In the fall, when I came back from leave, she didn't run to me, ready to play. When I found her in the bracken in the dark woods, I sank into the bloody mud, cradling her head, my grief soaking her coat. My girl, my dear girl, I sat with her for a long time, thinking about joy, about sorrow, about how love cracks you open. What good is your heart if it's not big enough to bear the breaking? Dog star. When crickets start shrilling their love songs, the dogs come out to lie on the dry, weedy slopes under Sirius's bright gaze. They come out of the dark woods, out of their dark dens, and lie alone, breathing softly. In the north, a meteor pulls its fire across the star-bright sky. The dogs here have grown wild, more wolf than dog. They are warrior dogs, wise and feral and free. They have seen enough of death to know there's an end for all of us. But just for now, they lie in deep peace as dew settles over the field, then vanishes when a rose light brightens the eastern sky. Distant thunder rises in the south. Or is it, again, the blast of bombs? The dogs who know how to live on the edge of extinction are gone. I hear the ancient drumbeat of a coming storm. I wrote this poem for my daughters who are now grown. It's called Keeping the Harvest. For 5 decades and more, I've kept the harvest, put the summer into jars. Silt slick tomatoes lowered themselves into the hive of my palm. Handfuls of basil hot from the sun, the sharp balm of oregano, onions and garlic chopped into green olive oil, the toil of summer near its end. Mason jars from the back stairs, a sack of lids, and big pots simmering over stove's yellow flame. Years of piccalilli and pepper relish, spiced cherries, golden moons of peaches in sweet syrup, apple conserve, jars of plums, a sip of sauce from a spoon. Outside steamed windows, my children played until I called them in to stir cinnamon candies into applesauce. A little in a white dish to try right now, as we listen for the faint tick as lids seal. Then stacking rank on rank of glowing jars of corn and beans, banked against winter's hunger. Tomatoes, just a dozen jars this year, more than enough for 2. So I send a gift of peaches in a blue jar, dilly beans, blueberry jam, a few brown wrapped packages in the mail to remind them of home.
Oh, Carol, do you have some more for us, or are
Yes,
you?
yes,
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me.
I'm giving you another sonnet. August in the Meadowlands. Open your dark door into the bee-clad clovered meadows of August, Walk into this fair month of ripening, of trilling toads, of worms. Watch a black snake, glossy in his new skin, measure himself over and over along the stony path. Then slip sideways into the hay-shorn field, into shrilling cicadas, the first red flames of fall, where the mist burns off by midday and milkweed pods toss their seeds like dreams into the hot sun-spilled saffron streamers, and monarchs cavort in the blazing shimmer. Then cut across the pasture to where berries release themselves into the brush and duff. Find the shade of this moss shaggy rock where we can carry our astonishment as tenderly as a newborn, where we can be dumb-addled by joy and let all things be as they will or won't, and silently watch the purple swallows dip and dive, riotously stitching sky to meadow. And I will, thank you. I will end with a poem that I wrote about my father. Seems a lot of us here this evening are reading poems about our families. So here's my last one. And this poem is called Size 10.5. Summer mornings he'd scuff across the red tile floors, feet bare, on the way to his workshop, where he made useful things from wood. There, in showers of cedar shavings and the sharp scent of pine, he carved spoons and ladles from rosewood, created bowls and bookcases and maple boxes with tiny hidden drawers, cribs and cradles too many to count, and once a rocking horse he painted in carousel colors. When September blew in with its frosty breath, he drew forth his slippers from under his bed, banged the soles together, and let fly a golden dust to dance in streams of light. Deerskin they were, I think, whiskey brown with a kind of woolly lining, ones I gave him years ago. Over time, the heels had flattened, where he shoved his feet into their warm cave, impatient for his workshop. Later, when the time came to close his house, empty the closet, and divvy up memories, I pulled his slippers from under the bed and swept away dust from the weathered leather. Grief is a puzzlement, arriving suddenly as it does, ready to set up shop again and stay a while, slipping in between taped boxes, labeled field guides, a stack of the khaki pants he favored, and his slippers with crushed heels, gilded in cedar curls.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Now, I have to ask, the 3 sonnets about the dogs, the dogs of Chernobyl, are they available anywhere? I mean, you got a lot of comments in the chat about those in particular. Are those published, Carol?
No, they aren't as of yet.
They will be.
I hope so. I'm also compiling another chapbook.
Excellent.
It's almost done, so
That's
thank you so much, everybody.
boy, that line, he was a good boy, I taught him stay. It's just is heartbreaking. Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so last for this evening anyway, we have Sean Frederick Forbes. Sean is an associate professor in residence of English and the director of the creative writing program at the University of Connecticut-Storrs. He's also a summer instructor for the Yale Young Writers Workshop at Yale University. He serves as poetry editor for New Square, the publication of the Sancho Panza Literary Society, of which he is a founding member. In 2017, Shawn received first place in the Nutmeg Poetry competition from the Connecticut Poetry Society. Providencia, which I have here, is his first book of poetry. So welcome, Shawn.
Barb, thank you so much. Thank you, Joan, Sharon, Tony, and Carol for warming up the virtual stage for me. It's wonderful to be read to. And I think that's one of the things that I tell my students, that it's very important when we focus on poetry to read poetry aloud and to see how it immerses you and envelops you. Barb, thank you so much for inviting me. This is absolutely wonderful. Lucy, thank you for everything that you're doing behind the scenes, and thank you to the Ridgewood Public Library. I'm also seeing some colleagues. Peggy Deep Shea is in the audience. Debbie Gilbert is here. Edwina Trentham is here. All people that I've read with. So thank you. So I'm going to give a historical caveat before I start to read some poems, and then I'll give a second sort of personal historical caveat so that you understand the island of Providencia, Colombia. Okay, so Isla de Providencia, historically known as Old Providence and generally known as Providencia, is a mountainous Caribbean island that is a part of the archipelago of San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina. Providencia lies midway between Costa Rica and Jamaica. It has an entire landmass of 6.6 miles. Just imagine that. Providencia was the site of an English Puritan colony established in 1629 by the Providence Island Company and was taken by Spain in 1641. So between the years of 1629 and upwards to the early 20th century, the islands of Providencia, San Andres, and Santa Catalina went back and forth between British and Spanish colonial forces. So let's think about this idea of 1 year, you're a British citizen, and then 5 years down the road, you're a Spanish citizen, and then 2 years down the road, you're an British citizen or colonial subject again, and then it goes back and forth and back and forth. Your identity is mixed, and you're speaking mostly an English-based patois. All of your documentations when you are a colonial subject of Spain are in Spanish, but you don't speak the language. So it's very important to sort of understand that. The other most important thing about Providencia is that the privateer Henry Morgan, the lieutenant governor of Jamaica, used Providencia as a base for raiding the Spanish Empire. So this person is going to be very important for a poem that you're going to hear later on. Providencia is also the birthplace of my maternal and paternal grandparents, as well as my mother. And I'll begin the personal caveat with an adage my grandparents used to tell me, which was listen to learn and learn to listen. This was the adage my maternal grandparents lived by. My grandmother had the equivalent of a third grade education, and my grandfather barely graduated junior high school. They immigrated to the United States, to Queens, New York City in 1965 from Providencia, Colombia. They weren't avid readers or writers, but they passed down an oral tradition that I cherish to this day, and it's a part of how Providencia came to be. And so I'll begin the first poem by noting that the title, Gnosis, is the Greek word for knowledge. Gnosis. After burning my right arm from a skillet with scalding canola oil, I fainted. I was 4. Perhaps the pain was extreme, or the stench of my delicate flesh quickly cooking did it. I was losing my sense of touch. My arm is a geography of scars. I can point out South and Central America from my index finger to the base of my thumb. The skin becomes darker on my forearm, like an ocean or the spotted river Styx, where my hairs are the rooted dead. My elbow is a rust color, cracked dry like the Sahara. I cut it once. The blood poured out like sweet water. My fingers went numb as my grandmother patched me up. I was 10, and for therapy, she advised writing to renew my skin. For years, I wrote without pen or paper, remembering stories, reciting phrases until I was 18. Then I began to tear away all I knew, ideas, images, facts as delicate as corn silk. My arm warmed, my fingers swollen and red, but the pen now steady in my hold. Thank you. This second poem is titled An Oracle Remembering Providencia's Formation. There is a rock formation in Providencia that looks like the figure of a man's head emerging from the sea. So if you think about this, this is my grandfather's photo, and the actual rock formation is called Morgan's Head after Captain Henry Morgan. Okay, and one of the things that I learned about oracles at the Temple of Delphi is that we like to believe that they were given all of these celestial and divine predictions. It turns out that the temple, the earth under which it stood, was breathing out sulfurous gases and all these types of gases. So what was happening was that the oracles were actually quite high under hallucinogens. And so it made me think about this idea of a man's head emerging from the sea and also about predictions and tying that in together to make a poem. An oracle remembering Providencia's formation. Now I am a gentle voice in the wind, barely audible in a violent storm. But once I walked earth imbued with power that could scorch the sun. Days before the explosion, the Earth's core whispered in my ear how it envied the dark ocean depths. Trouble began at sunrise with rumbling underwater tremors. My pulse throbbed for hours, blue veins bulging, white smoke puffing out of my open pores, thousands of feet into the air, as if to say, breathe in the burnt dust, sulfur, and salt. And so I did. My expressions turned lyrical, raised eyebrows, blossoming pupils, triumphant nostrils. Slimy ochre sand bubbled from the ocean, slowly hardening. I was lifted above, its jagged peaks tore into my feet, and soon I was drained of blood. Waves, steady ripples surged through me, utterances of a language so charming. The earth's core spoke solemnly that my fate was to be a tender voice in the wind, that the land would always feel my former body's pulse. I was to oversee the hundreds of years of erosion necessary to sculpt the figure of a man's head from the sea. Thank you. So it's the Day of the Dead. Actually, we celebrate it either today or tomorrow. It really just depends. And I'm thinking about my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. She was an indomitable woman. Like I told you, she had a third-grade education, but she was an entrepreneur. She used to sell Tupperware door to door, and she had the perfect business model. She would go to every door and she would ask for the lady of the house, And this was after having picked me up at daycare. And then she would ask for the lady of the house, and she was never denied entry because she had her cute little grandson in tow. And I was given milk and cookies, and my grandmother would come out having sold $600 worth of Tupperware. She had the perfect business model. So this next poem, Errand, 1949, my grandmother's name was Eileen in Providencia, shows you her indomitable spirit, and she's on an errand. She has to send something to my grandfather, a telegram. Errand, 1949, Eileen in Providencia. The main road is a dirt road. From Lazy Hill to town, it's more than an hour on foot, but she refuses to ride side saddle on her brother's horse. She's wearing open-toed high heels, her thick black hairs twisted into a fat chignon. Her silky floral dress clings to her stomach. The women notice the slight bulge, anticipating the disfigurement of motherhood for her, while their husbands crave the perspiration gathering in her cleavage. She walks into the bank, her dusty suede heels sparking hard against the tiled floor, sweet and sirenic. She spends 15 minutes writing a telegram to her husband in Curaçao. She pictures him kissing his mistress and shoves the form to the clerk. He reads the line, "That barren woman will lose her scent. Stop, come back." She sees the clerk write this down on a separate piece of paper, knowing he will give it to his wife later. She pays the fee, refuses to thank him, and slowly leaves the bank, cautious as a freed slave. And she's pregnant with my mother in this particular poem, and hence I'm here. So the next poem I'm going to read is titled Island Gazelle. And my grandmother was a midwife, and then she decided to take on a different calling one day. And you'll see what this calling is. Island Gazelle. As a midwife, my grandmother was once paid in honey. Against impotence, she fixed elixirs with the secret fire in honey. Her younger brother had studied the myths. According to lore, he said, before his hunts, Cupid doctored his arrows in honey. Growing tired of her trade, she took on an ancient calling, named herself matchmaker, envisioned unions glued in honey. Her clients swallowed a teaspoon of nectar, a supplication to love. Would she be called a bruja if she awoke the mystical powers in honey? She dreamt of a spirit playing guitar with brown quills for fingers, and knew she'd have a grandson who'd write verses phrased in honey. Named Eileen after the Celts' underworld demon, she listened to my musings about Hades, the gods ordered boats painted in honey. As a child, she told me my skin was smooth, rich amber. She laughed as I drenched my winter pale skin in honey. Thank you. That's one of my favorite poems to read aloud. It just reminds me of my grandmother's vibrancy and this idea that, like I said, she was an entrepreneur. She was constantly thinking about how to make money because she loved a couple of things. She loved Givenchy, she loved Chanel suits, she loved Coach bags. In fact, one of her lipsticks was a Givenchy lipstick that was $50 a tube. And one of the great things about my grandmother was that in her Coach purse, she carried this lipstick, her rosary beads, and a switchblade. She was ready for everything. That's my grandmother. This next poem is titled Isla Providencia. From his final trip to Providencia, I asked my grandfather to bring back a piece of the island. So he wrapped a conch shell with 3 towels deep in his suitcase among plastic jars jammed with stewed plums and orange rinds. A gift of hidden sources. Make of it what you wish, he says, placing the common Caribbean souvenir in my lap, leaving me to imagine Henry Morgan discovering the shell, cupping it over his right ear, swaying to the siren's cunning whistles, declaring Providencia his final resting place. My grandfather tells me that a lazy hill woman's dying wish was for a conch shell to be laid on her grave, since she loved the mollusk's tough muscle. I pretend I am a Carib warrior, inserting my fingers into the shell's curved aperture like Poseidon, wielding this weapon above my head against British and Spanish. How easy the turn to violence. The shell's beige, pink, and ivory no longer protective covering, but the blood and bone of pirates, Indians, slaves. And my last poem is titled Caribeño. And Caribeño in Spanish is a person from the Caribbean. And this poem is about sort of seeing the island of Providencia from an aerial view. Caribeño. From the air, it's a massive rock fringed with coral reef, a calcium carbonate necklace sparkling chromatic blues and rippling waters, an island of green hills. Providencia plumes with a thick, rugged terrain, camouflage some islanders use when evening spirits and stars appear. They hop in motorized dinghies to one of the jeweled quays, waiting for midnight to make a quick drug run to Panama. Europeans take holiday at quaint 2-star hotels named after Captains Morgan and Ori, sipping rum and coke, enjoying primitive life. Scientists, red and mosquito bitten, marvel at hawksbill sea turtles and fire coral. You islanders farm or have decent work, waiting for a plane of tourists to spend money. Enter our hero. He's a man on the cusp, a well-spoken American who affects a rhythmic patois, knows more island culture than he should, feels guilt each time he writes about Providencia. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. I'm assuming that's you in the last few lines of the poem.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad now I have a whole new perspective and I can hear your voice when I'm reading this, which is going to be wonderful. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you.
Thank you all our wonderful poets this evening. I just want to let you know what's coming up for our December reading. I can't believe it's November already. We are going to be welcoming James Finnegan, Joan Seliger Sidney, Catherine D'Annunzio, Karen Silk, and Tim Duffy. So make sure you come back on December 6th and join us for the next episode of Poems from Connecticut's Four Corners. Thank you, Lucy Hanley and Ridgefield Library.
Thank you, Barb Jenness.
And thank you everyone who joined us this evening. It was a real pleasure and it went way too fast as always. So thank you.